Diana, I am much obliged. I discovered my way. The remarks of a man who was in love weren't those. A monarch, burdened by both his crown and his regret, whispered these small confessions too late. The man who previously disregarded every royal protocol in order to be with Camilla, King Charles III, must now confront an unalterable reality. He made a poor mate selection. A cassette tape that had been lost to the mists of time was unearthed and played. Diana speaks with a weak, broken voice that echoes through the universe, delivering a message that shatters him to his very heart. No longer are there any delusions to safeguard, and no more acceptable justifications. Finally, after all that, Charles distances himself from Camilla, removing her from any and all privileges that her position as queen had previously afforded her. When a king finally does more than admit he was mistaken, he takes action. The world witnesses history. What, however, did the tape actually contain? It broke Charles's heart so profoundly? Why did he abandon Camilla in the space of a single night, the same lady he had defended with the whole monarchy? We will find the answers soon. Sitting serenely in his personal library at Buckingham Palace, King Charles III enjoyed a summer of 2025. His wrinkled face was lit up by the gentle light of a vintage desk lamp. Just outside the window, you could hear the wind gently rustling through the royal gardens and the happy chirping of birds. But there was a weight to the air within the room, as if it were a lifetime's worth of stress. He found a letter on his desk that had just arrived from the office of the Queen of the UK, Camilla. It was a brusque message informing him that Camilla would not be attending the Royal Charitable Trust's 50th anniversary party that weekend. It was sealed with the royal crest and held aloft by an aide's rigid hand. The official reason given was a hectic schedule, but Charles could see it was only an excuse. The letter was short, but it cut deep, bringing back the years he had spent fighting his disease and the icy absence of the wife he had thought would be there for him in his last days. With his eyes locked on the dancing flames in the fireplace, Charles placed Camilla's letter on the table. As he battled his sickness, Camilla continued to revel in the spotlight, and the letter's weak excuse of a busy schedule was a clear reminder of her remoteness. A silent determination welling up inside him caused him to squeeze his palms into fists. Deceit could not be his demise. Even though his health has improved, he is still carrying a heavy heart from his hospital stays, during which the crack beneath the crown became apparent. Acting was Charles' only option for preserving his legacy. He sensed an impending mental storm and knew that the days to come would shape not just his rule but also his identity. As Charles closed his eyes, he was transported to the beginning of 2024, to a peaceful chamber at Sandringham, bathed in soft light that danced through thick silk drapes, throwing subtle shadows on his weary countenance. The air was heavy with the monotonous hum of medical equipment, a harsh cadence similar to a heartbeat that is rapidly diminishing. The relentless assault of cancer had transformed his every breath into an agonizing struggle. Physical agony was nothing compared to the emotional scar left by Camilla's frigid absence. She was non-existent in any way, no visits, letters, or phone calls, during his lengthy hospital stay. All that was said about her was that she attended expensive parties in London, smiled perfectly for the cameras, and secretly discussed her future plans with trusted advisors. With titles like Queen Camilla, Timeless Grace, and the proud icon of the monarchy, she was praised by the main tabloids as a representation of power. Charles, however, was more knowledgeable than everybody else from his chilly hospital bed. The sad reality that Camilla didn't love him was concealed by a flawlessly crafted facade. She adored the throne, the authority, and the limelight he brought. Those who loved me most were the ones I damaged. A hollow crown, Charles murmured in a raspy voice. As though the words had pried themselves out of his darkest hours. It was the introspection of a guy confronted with a turning point in his life and the consequences of his many blunders. In his recollection, he fumbled with a worn photo album resting on the nightstand and flipped through the pages, his hands shaking with each turn. Like long-lost recollections, the images resurfaced, full of life but also eerily familiar. Diana, who had loved him wholeheartedly, stood behind him in one shot taken at Highgrove in the summer of 1987, her smile as soft as the early summer sun. The limelight, the throne, and the titles were unnecessary for her. She was content with him as an ordinary Charles, not as king of a kingdom. However, Charles had been swayed by Camilla's enticing murmurs and other temptations in the past. As he closed his eyes in that hospital bed, a chilly and piercing image of Camilla flashed before his eyes. She was center stage, constantly drawing attention to herself and reminding him of the advantages she had obtained because to him. Diana stood before him, her eyes filled with sorrow but determined, a night before at Kensington Palace, he recalled. Her voice quivered with strength as she assured Charles that he did not have to choose between her and the throne. However, you will forfeit both if you go with her. In the midst of his love and the pressures of being a king, those words that he had previously disregarded now resounded like an unbreakable curse. Charles experienced a sense of betrayal while in the hospital. He was betrayed not only by Diana, the woman he had risked everything for, his reputation, his family, and their love, but also by his own poor decisions. Think back to 2023, when the British royal family's official visit to South Korea became famous not for their diplomatic successes but for the moment that revealed a deep division within the monarchy. Camilla made an appearance with the First Lady of South Korea, a beautiful young woman whose radiant smile adorned every photo. As Camilla stood uncomfortably, her expressionless, icy eyes betrayed her discomfort. The world's media wasted no time capturing the awkward moment. She appeared as if she had stepped out of a bygone period in her custom-designed, verdant gown from a famous fashion house. Her bejeweled fingers quivered slightly, as if repressing an overwhelming feeling, while she firmly grasped her clutch. On the other hand, Princess Catherine of Wales stood gracefully in the backdrop in an ivory gown. All of the movements were delicate and the smiles enchanted the onlookers. The light appeared to trail after her wherever she went. Not because of her fancy jewelry or clothing, but because of the authenticity of her deeds. There were hints of similarities between her and Camilla, and the South Korean press hailed her as the crown gem of the British royalty. So that she wouldn't be overshadowed, Camilla unexpectedly asked Catherine to stand behind the First Lady, as if to shove her out of the spotlight. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. The British press started drawing constant parallels. Catherine, the picture of sophistication, and Camilla, the embodiment of hopelessness. She appeared like a statue from another century as she stood by South Korea's First Lady, according to one prominent outlet's headline. Camilla felt her pride sliced to shreds by the remarks. With a stern expression on her face, she read the papers in solitude in her plush Seoul hotel room. "You are still the Queen, Majesty," an advisor who was close to the Queen tried to reassure her. However, Camilla's response was a subtle smile, concealing the rage in her eyes. Camilla called Catherine that night to a private room lit by warm golden light and filled with old paintings. The room seemed to be holding its breath because of how dense the air was. In a chilly, almost dictatorial tone, Camilla warned that attendees at upcoming events not to wear red. Too much attention is drawn to it. A soft grin and a subtle nod from Catherine, who always keeps her cool under pressure, betrayed a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. It dawned on her that this was about more than simply style. A cautionary tale. With the intention of keeping her in the background so that Camilla could maintain the limelight. A few days later, at a state banquet in Seoul, Camilla made an appearance illuminated by a dazzling red gown, a ruby tiara, and rich ruby jewelry. Even though she strided with confidence, her discomfort was plainly seen in her gaze. Every stride she took was a proclamation that no one could unseat her as queen. She was the target of ridicule from the British press, nevertheless. Reclaiming the spotlight is the desperate queen's goal. People pointed out that Camilla had forbidden Catherine from wearing red, therefore breaking her own rule was seen as the dress of contradiction. Pictures of Camilla standing alone and posing for pictures quickly became internet fodder for jokes. According to one commenter, the world only sees Catherine, even though the star belongs to someone else. The royal staff were fully aware of Camilla's manipulativeness and jealousy. William and Catherine, who were getting ready for a charity function at Kensington Palace, were the recipients of a private report. While reading the report, William clenched his fists and his eyes flashed with subdued rage. As Catherine huskily tried on dresses for the impending occasion, he glanced over at her. "We had no intention of becoming involved," he spoke in a low, determined voice. "We will not sit on our hands if she attempts to play power games." With a resolute expression, Catherine nodded. She told William that they weren't doing this for the power. "Your mother and the monarchy are our motivations for doing this. they understood that they needed to behave with wisdom and dedication, not fury, to preserve Diana's legacy and the future of the monarchy. As his health deteriorated, King Charles III seldom visited Clarence's house, but in March of 2025, he sat in a modest sitting room there. His wrinkled features and tired but piercing eyes were brought to life by the gentle light of vintage wall sconces. His cancer, albeit somewhat under control, was nevertheless a constant worry, according to the specialists he saw in London, from which he had recently returned. However, he wasn't burdened by his ailment today. Unexpectedly, he ran across a former palace advisor, who broke news that sent shockwaves through him. After a clandestine meeting, Camilla and her legal team discussed how to protect her wealth, which would include a large portion of the royal estate upon his passing. The advisor's careful delivery of the news pierced Charles like a dagger, setting forth a tempest of rage and agony. Camilla, the woman he had given his life to save, was making plans to continue her life independently, with her fame and power intact, he realized. As the thick wooden door shut, Charles sunk into an antique armchair and stared at a photograph of Diana that had been maintained from a bygone era. The image served as a silent reminder of his past and his request for solitude. He thought back on the years when he and Camilla kept their affair a secret from Diana, who, with an open heart, attempted to salvage their marriage. On a 1992 evening at Balmoral, he recalled Diana saying, "Charles, I know you love her, but I still want to save our family for the boys, for you," in a soothing but troubled voice. "Also, I'm holding on to the hope that we once had love." In the past, he had disregarded her remarks, attributing them to the futile cries of a distraught spouse clinging to an unhappy union. It had dawned on Charles that Diana had been correct. Camilla never gave him the love he lacked, and he failed to appreciate the love she struggled for in order to preserve their family. Not much was shocking about Camilla's meeting with attorneys. Charles had observed increasing indications of her disconnection in the past few months. Camilla looked stunning at a charity event in late 2024, seducing politicians and tycoons, while Charles, who was trying to put on a brave front, stood silently in the corner, surrounded by loneliness. Instead of caring about his well-being or sharing personal moments, she concentrated on enhancing her reputation as a strong queen. Camilla once turned down Charles's offer to accompany him on a hospital visit to assist cancer patients, citing other commitments. Nevertheless, the press subsequently revealed that she had attended a luxurious Mayfair banquet. The events that Charles had previously written off as simple misunderstandings now painted a vivid picture of treachery. Standing up, Charles made his way to his desk. In the calm presence of a little notebook. "I chose her, but she only chose the throne," he read, his gaze lingering on a line scribbled in trembling ink as he opened it. A fact he could no longer deny was confirmed by those words written in a moment of agony. "Not wanting to meddle, but I'm afraid Mom doesn't prioritize our family," his worried-looking son told him during a conversation he had with William earlier that year. At that point, Charles had disregarded William's caution. He had previously denied seeing anything, but now he realized his son had. Charles contacted a reliable lawyer in a fit of wrath and agony, his voice shaking but determined. "A variety of sessions with the Royal Council. My will and Camilla's job both require my attention." Charles forcefully stated, "I've allowed this deception go on too long," in response to the advisor's question about his certainty. "This is the moment for me to take action." Hanging up, he stared at the portrait of Diana. For a split second, he thought she was staring back at him. Without assigning guilt, but rather out of quiet empathy. While Charles acknowledged he could not alter events that had already occurred, he was confident in his ability to influence what were to come. He was determined that Camilla would not be allowed to abuse her position as crown princess or let her ambition discredit his legacy through Diana's. May morning in the year 2025 found King Charles III's sick room bathed in a rare warmth as the first rays of summer sun poured through the trees at Sandringham. William
stepped in, carrying a weathered leather case that betrayed his contemplative yet determined nature. Hidden within was an antiquated cassette tape that had been recorded by Diana during her dying days. Accompanying it was a brief note written by her in her shaking hand, urging Charles to listen if he desires the truth. William brought the package to the table and set it there with kind but determined eyes. "Father, I believe this is something you should hear." His voice was low but forceful as he said. as if returning an item from Charles's past that he had attempted to erase. Opening the box, Charles's pulse raced as he beheld the tape. His fingers quivered with fear. He played the tape with the help of an assistant. A soft, sorrowful voice, Diana's, echoed through the empty room. "Perhaps you have seen the truth, Charles, if you are listening to this. Not the kingdom, but you deserve love. Keep that in mind and keep our children safe." Charles felt her decades-old voice stab him in the chest, like a razor slicing through any last vestiges of Camilla's deception. As he tightly gripped his fist, he felt a rush of emotion welling up inside him. Diana had attempted to offer him sincerity, and he felt it for the first time in years. Like a premonition from long ago, the recording brought to light an unpleasant reality. Diana gave her life to safeguard their family, while Camilla had utilized his affection to gain her position. That recording was the last nail in the coffin. After letting Camilla use her influence over the monarchy, Charles could no longer deny it. Diana, on the other hand, had attempted to rescue their family with an open heart. At Buckingham Palace, he called a meeting of the royal legal staff. The atmosphere in the meeting room, which was lighted by crystal chandeliers and filled with old paintings, became oppressive as tensions rose. His voice was weak but resolute as he decreed that Camilla be relieved of all royal duties. Her principal female representation to the monarchy will be replaced by Catherine, Princess of Wales. This wasn't your average administrative adjustment, and the lawyers couldn't help but exchange shocked looks. A political and media tempest would ensue, shaking the monarchy to its foundations. "This might have major ramifications," a senior advisor warned Your Majesty. However, Charles severed his eyes, setting them ablaze with an intense passion driven by sorrow and remorse. "Catherine possesses the humility and authenticity necessary to represent the royal family. Camilla, no." Complete secrecy was maintained regarding the directive. However, as they made their way past Camilla's office, staff talked in the palace's lengthy halls, keeping their voices low. With worried looks on their faces, some of her close associates were removed from their positions of authority and had to pack their possessions. Even though she had always thought her throne was impregnable, Camilla started to feel the tremors of an impending storm. Standing alone in her room at Clarence House, gazing into a large mirror, she enjoyed a rare moment of alone. Worry lines appeared on her face, which had previously shown pride and self-assurance. Her fingers lightly caressed the icy jewels as she stroked the ruby tiara resting on her desk. "I sacrificed everything for this," she said in a voice that went uncared for. Diana had foretold this fact decades ago, and now her time was running out, she knew it. At Kensington Palace, Catherine was getting ready for her new position. She started attending meetings with royal advisors, her demeanor belying her knowledge. She had no intention of stealing the spotlight from Camilla, but her genuine public remarks and unwavering love for Charles's youngsters displayed an intensity Camilla lacked. Sitting in their comfortable living room with William one peaceful day, Catherine sat with determined, worried gaze. She voiced her disapproval of power in a quiet but determined manner. "But I'll go to whatever lengths to preserve your mother's legacy and bring our children up in a monarchy, if that's what it takes." William, his eyes betraying his pride and determination, seized her hand. "Mother isn't the only one we're helping out. Father, our children, and the people are the reasons we're doing it." At that very moment, it hit them. Protecting the monarchy wasn't all they were doing. They were restoring Diana, a stolen name, and making it shine again as a beacon for what was to come. It was never easy for Camilla to admit defeat. In response to Charles's order to remove her from her position, she put on a carefully staged display, as if to prove that she was still the monarchy's focal point. She held an extravagant press gathering at Clarence House. Perched atop her exquisitely coiffed locks was the royal tiara, a glistening jewel-studded crown. Standing before the reporters, Camilla posed for every camera angle with a bright but strained grin, as if to declare to the world that her reign as queen would never end. Unfortunately, the attention she had sought to regain was no longer commanding. Once enthralled by her haughtiness, the media eventually averted their gaze. Camilla, the broken emblem of an age, was the cover story of a big news outlet. Her greeting was compared by another scathing critic to the last-ditch attempt by a monarch who is losing control. Her worried expression and forced grin were plainly seen in her heavily cropped photographs. She believes she is acting out Elizabeth's reign, but everyone sees through her amateurish act, and the public mocks her on social media. An historic encounter took place that evening at Buckingham Palace. The Duchess and Prince were called by Charles to a chamber whose weathered wooden walls seemed to conceal royal secrets passed down through the ages. A wall clock, counting down the seconds till a rainstorm, was the only sound to break the dense air. The light from the chandeliers highlighted the stark contrast in the three of them as they faced each other. Standing tall with determined gaze, Camilla wore a beautiful yet icy black silk gown. Standing serenely, Catherine exuded an aura of tranquil power, dressed in a plain pale blue gown. Sitting between them was Charles, whose weak frame was in stark contrast to his unwavering stare, which belonged to a king about to hand down his verdict. After a long period of quiet, Camilla spoke out, her voice cold and sharp. "Diana's shadow is all she is. Even though I've been plagued by comparisons to her and that name my entire life, I am the one who has remained Charles." The poison in her words betrayed her desperation at losing everything, but they were also incredibly vicious. As the crown she had sacrificed her life for slipped away, her voice quivered not from sadness but from rage and terror. Despite Camilla's tantrum, Catherine remained motionless, her expression unchanged. She remained silent. She could have skipped it. Her humility and authenticity conveyed a great deal. Camilla will never understand the significance of her soft yet commanding presence. With gloomy but determined eyes, Charles turned to Camilla. He went back on his time with her and the times he had mistakenly believed were love but were actually deceitful and disguised in glitz. "Today, I choose the light," he said Catherine, his voice weak but determined. "Plus, Camilla, that's not you." As he spoke, his words sliced through
Camilla's last illusions. Standing motionless, her pale complexion and tightly pursed lips betrayed her struggle with overwhelming emotions. The sound of her heels hitting the marble floor sounded like a rhythm as she stumbled out of the room, marking the end of an era. For the first time, she realized she had fallen short, not in terms of power, but in terms of the man whose heart she had believed she had captured. William was waiting for Catherine when she returned to Kensington Palace. With her hands held tightly, she sat next to him, shaking with fear. "This is not what I requested, William. I like to stay out of the thick of things." Despite her obvious emotions, her eyes radiated determination. With a look of trust in his eyes, William grasped her hand. "You're not merely fulfilling your father's wishes. You're serving your mother, the Queen, and the people by doing this. This kingdom needs you." At that same second, when Catherine nodded, she understood she was more than just a princess. A new era's emblem was taking shape in her. Someone who will continue Diana's legacy of compassion and responsibility. Removing Camilla's job was just the beginning of Charles' plan to make amends for his faults, he realized. He wished for a resurrection, a return to the principles he had abandoned, rather than a legacy of strife and division. The royal legal team was summoned to Buckingham Palace's study, which was adorned with ancient oak bookcases housing historical records. Even though he had been sick for months, his voice still had the determination of a king determined to change the course of history. His decision to have his will rewritten sent shockwaves across the palace. It was a first in contemporary royal history to completely exclude Camilla out of his will and personal wealth. To ensure that the royal family's legacy would be preserved by individuals exemplifying responsibility and empathy, William and Catherine were designated custodians of the royal estates for the subsequent generation. Among Charles's most noteworthy acts, he personally authorized the restoration of a philanthropic foundation bearing Diana's name. As a campaigner, she was an outspoken advocate for helping homeless children, providing aid to victims of conflict, and bringing attention to issues of mental health and poverty. Word of the new will spread like wildfire through Buckingham Palace's winding halls once it seeped out of the palace. In the vicinity of Camilla's office, a flurry of apprehensive whispers escaped the lips of the staff. The royal legal team wasted little time silencing one of her former advisors who, in a last-ditch effort to safeguard her interests, proposed going to court. When Camilla realized how vulnerable she was, she sought out influential people from the reign of Queen Elizabeth II in the hopes that they would rally behind her now. However, the doors of power that had previously been available to her, representing manipulation behind the scenes, were now tightly locked. Rather than being afraid, everyone could see that her time had come to an end, thus they were afraid to stand with her. In the glamour she had worked so hard to achieve, Camilla shrank into oblivion. Her worried face was illuminated by the desk lamp as she sat alone in her room on a peaceful evening at Clarence's residence. A huge mirror stood before her, but she was too afraid to look into it, seeing only a diminished version of the formidable queen she had once been. "I did everything for the crown," she said, her palm shaking and her eyes lost in thought as she held a glass of wine. Unfortunately, no one paid attention, and she experienced the same sense of isolation that Charles had known all along. As he did so, Charles sought comfort in putting pen to paper. His last days were filled with letters to his boys, William in particular. He wrote, "My son was wrong to choose power over love," in a letter written in a shaky style on royal stationery. "Keep Catherine safe, for she is the beacon of hope for our monarchy." Not only was the father apologizing, but he was also pleading with his son to learn from his error. Sitting alone in Sandringham's library, Charles would often look through old images of Diana, smiling with their sons, as well as her beloved ones. Reviving Diana's joy became his means of paying her a virtual visit, as each image brought back memories of the virtues he had lost. Every action, from choosing projects for orphan children to allocating funds for mental health initiatives, was overseen by him as if it were a late act of atonement. As time went on, he came to understand that the crown and power were not a king's lasting legacies, but rather the principles passed down through the ages. After learning about the new will, William and Catherine listened in thoughtful quiet. Their faces were warmed by the light of the fireplace as they sat across from one another in the comfortable sitting room of Kensington Palace. With his fists clenched around the paper and his eyes filled with anguish, William read the letter his father had written. He spoke in a low but determined voice about how his father had done the right thing. "Kate, this is not going to be a picnic. This places us right at the storm's eye." Taking his hand, Catherine's eyes gleamed with resolve as she exhibited her composed strength. "It's not about power," she said quietly but firmly. "In the name of your parents and all those who hold the monarchy in high regard, we are undertaking this task. I will do all in my power to ensure that this honors your mother's memory." With love and pride in his eyes, William gazed at her. He spoke softly, smiling, and stated that you are more than simply the beacon of the monarchy. I am yours. Catherine, in spite of her new responsibility, remains unfaltering in her honesty. She joined other royal advisers in sessions to plan the administration of royal funds and the use of Diana's bequest. In one gathering, she brought up the idea of increasing programs for underprivileged kids in the UK's worst regions, drawing inspiration from Diana's trips to hospitals and orphanages. With an impassioned voice, she informed the advisers that this is more than just a charity. This is how we honor Diana's legacy by standing at the side of the most defenseless. Her authenticity touched the advisers, who were accustomed to formal talks about protocol and finances. The monarchy needs her more than a princess, she's what the people need to trust them again, one wise adviser confided to another. At the same time, Camilla encountered an unpalatable truth while she was alone on her Scottish estate. Silence or courteous refusals greeted her attempts to reconnect with erstwhile allies. Once eager to report on her every action, the press now hardly mentions her at all, save in brief, uninteresting pieces. She had long since forgotten about her empty wine glass as she stood at the window, gazing at the starry sky. Reflecting on her time spent with Charles, she realized that what she had thought was love was actually just emptiness. Despite losing my voice, I succeeded in claiming the throne, she whispered. It hit her like a ton of bricks. No matter how beautiful the crown was, it would never be enough to satisfy her emotional needs. Charles, despite deteriorating health, achieved serenity in his last moments. It was the future he could